This is the Flyerdelphia Podcast, part of sportstalkphilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heaning. Hello, Flyers fans, and welcome to another edition of the Flyerdelphia Podcast, part of sportstalkphilly.com. I'm your host, Kevin Durso, joined by Rob Riches and Dan Heaning. So we've got a lot to talk about from the past week in Flyers hockey. We've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly with this team so far. We'll get to all of it for you on this week's show. So Rob and I were on last week and did a breakdown of the first two games of the season, and really, you saw two competitive games. You saw the Flyers take control of the second period in Vegas in the season opener on their way to a win, and stick it out in Colorado to the bitter end. Ultimately, it was a 5-2 loss, but two late goals from Colorado dictated the final score. It was really a closer game than the final score appeared. And then you had Tuesday's home opener, and that's where we start with this week. And guys, I was there covering the game, and I don't know that I've ever been as tuned out to a game as any earlier than I did in this one. I felt like the slow start at the beginning was one thing, and then once the score at the end of the first period was what it was, I think I was just completely tuned out and just already had chalked it up. Already was just, how much longer do we have to watch this kind of thing? Like, there's, the results are aside from our seat upstairs. It's not about the result. We're there to cover the team. We're there to tell you whatever happens, no matter what it is. But at the same time, part of it is that you do want to see good, entertaining hockey. And we'll get to a game at the end of the week that was a good, entertaining hockey game that actually remains competitive throughout. Whether it ends the right way or not for the Flyers, it's more about, you just want to be entertained, even from our seat. It's tough to watch. It's why preseason games are so tough. It's tough to watch a game that is boring and drags on and you just want it to end. This was one of those games, and I was kind of just tuned out. It was, let me write this stuff and get out of here kind of thing. And this was just pathetic from start to finish. It was ugly. It was embarrassing. There was really nobody who was good in this game. I mean, the final score speaks for itself, obviously. It was an 8-2 loss in the home opener. But it's more than just, games are more than just a final score. I saw a completely disorganized effort, way too many opportunities for San Jose. It was basically like an all-star game for the Sharks at that point. What was your guys' take on this, and how you felt like, what, if you can put into words what you think about the home opener? Go ahead. This is our forum right here, so go right ahead.
That was something, all right.
Yeah.
I saw that final score, and I saw how that game went, and it was speechless. You almost wonder how something like that can happen. And I absolutely get that San Jose is a contender this year. They are absolutely in the conversation for the Stanley Cup final. This is a very ballyhooed season for them, but I mean, what was that? That was just all sorts of bad.
I had to binge watch most of these games because of for work reasons I couldn't watch them live. And so when I went through the San Jose game, I know I saw the Logan Couture goal live, but when I saw it live and then when I watched it again, that just seemed like that was just such a deflating goal to me, because that one looked like Brian Elliott could have stopped that one. I'm not going to throw Brian Elliott under the bus for this particular game, because there was a lot of ugly defensive play, and you knew this was going to happen with the way they have the defense core set up, and then you still have Brian Elliott can be really, really good, and then sometimes he can be really, really bad. And I don't think he was really, really bad in this game, but I think on the first two goals, he definitely could have helped the team out a little bit more by playing the shot either better with Couture, or not giving up such an egregious rebound on the Joe Pavelski goal. But once they were down 2-0, you can kind of get a sense that the team was now just chasing the game, and then they just kept taking penalty after penalty after penalty, to the point where you were just encouraging San Jose to blow your doors off and get out of there as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about that first goal by Couture, Dan, you're right. It was completely one that Brian Elliott's got to stop there for you. And the other part of it to me was, here they come out of the gate, and the Flyers really actually started. It's hard to believe, but the first 3 minutes of the game, they looked pretty good. They actually were kind of driving the play. They were getting zone time. They were being able to try to create some chances. And then just like that, you give up one odd man rush, and I don't even know that Logan Couture had crossed center ice yet. And in my mind, I'm already sitting here going, here it comes. They're going to score right off of this here, because it was kind of a recipe for disaster right there. Let's give them an odd man rush right out of the gate. Everything's been going the other way. Here comes really the first big test for Brian Elliott, and you needed him to make a save, and he didn't. That's the first one. The second one, forget just about the big rebound for a second. It's 11 seconds after the first goal gets scored. It's really outrageous at this point to think that right off of the ensuing faceoff from the first goal, it's as if no one was playing for that 11-second period. Let's just let them come right in and get another scoring chance. And Elliott leaves a massive rebound, and Pavelski didn't even get all of it. He kind of whiffs on the opportunity. He's trying to bat it a little bit out of the air in a sense, but he kind of whiffs on it. And it still, it was basically a changeup that goes into the net because there's so much net to shoot at. It just set the tone for it. But I also thought that in that game, the Flyers had opportunities to make it more competitive at different times. It's 2-0, and for a little while throughout the period, you're sitting there going, 2-0 is 2-0. They've been in spots before where you're down 2-0 early in a game. The next goal changes things. So what they needed was to get the next goal. They did not get the next goal. And then even early in the second period, they're down 4-0. They get the power play goal from Shane Gostisbehere. And you're sitting there thinking, just get the next one. If it's 4-2, you'll get people thinking. You'll get people in the crowd back into this game a little bit, because it's only going to be 2 goals. And they had an opportunity right around the halfway point with another power play to try to get it back, and they didn't. And it basically at that point left no room for error. So when San Jose gets another power play, yeah, they did not score on it, but they score seconds after it's over, and Evander Kane gets his second goal of the game. At that point, that was really the end of it. It was the end of any discussion of maybe they can try to start a comeback, because if they don't get the second, if they were to get the second goal, you could talk about it. It's a 2-goal game. Sure, they're in the game, and one more goal puts you halfway back to that completing the comeback. You need 2 goals. Simple as that. But they weren't able to even get the second one here to cut it to 2. And by that point, San Jose was just cleaning up at that point. The third period, too, to me was just, not only was it one of those periods where it was, let's just get out of Dodge as best we can here with whatever it is, but I found it funny the way that San Jose continued to pile on. They started at that point, you're capitalizing on the power play again. And then it was the shorthanded goal at the end too. It was like, I actually even tweeted out that when it was 7-1 and San Jose the Flyers got a late power play with about 3 minutes left, I even called it here's like this opportunity for them to get like the sympathy goal. Let's just get the goal that makes it look a little bit better on the scoreboard. Maybe the officials are trying to give them one chance to score here or something like that. And then sure enough, they go down and give up a shorthanded goal instead. It was just, by that point, it was just laughable. And it capped off a really, really poor, embarrassing night for sure.
Yeah, this was just one of those games where you take the game film and you don't even look at it. You throw it in the trash, burn it, send it to hell, because you're not really going to learn anything. You made a couple mistakes early, and you never really got back into the game. I thought the Flyers played well in the second period, but by that time, the game was already decided.
Yeah, and I find it funny too, because a year ago, when the Flyers opened at home and played the Washington Capitals, they go out and they win a game 8-2. And I remember Barry Trotz's press conference that night and him just saying the exact same thing you just did, Dan. It's, you don't keep any of this stuff. You just file it away. It's not a game to evaluate. Just file it away as a night that gets away from you and come back the next night and try to be better. Simple as that. There's nothing to look at here. Everybody knows they weren't good enough, so you file it away and you come back. And I think that the Flyers having a game the following night was good for them, so there wasn't a lot of time to dwell on what had happened. Yeah, they came in and they were frustrated. And I think some of the post-game comments from the players really said a lot. I like that there wasn't really any sugarcoating it here. To sit there and say, for Claude Giroux to say that they came out and they played like crap, great. Actually lay it out there for us. Don't try to spin this into if we could have gotten back into it, maybe we could have stopped the bleeding or something like this. So, or we had opportunities, or we were better than what the score indicated. Whatever. No, just say it like it is. Just tell it like it is.
I think Gossesbear also had the "I feel so effing bad for Moose" quote.
Yeah, oh yeah, and that's the thing. It's that type of thing, and for him to keep talking about it, reading the comments doesn't do it justice. You have to listen to Ghost's tone in talking about this, because they asked, like, one of the questions was, did you come in after the first period where you kind of tapping Brian Elliott on the pads, like, at least, like, almost as a way to say, like, way to hang in there in a period where we left you with nothing because we gave up 23 shots, and Ghost kind of, like, beside himself goes, it's not even that. We left him out to dry. We didn't show up. And you like the brutal honesty there because it helps you. I think it helps you look in the mirror a little. I think Gossesbear said that too. People had to look in the mirror and start playing better. Simple as that. And it's like, okay, good. It's a good spot to evaluate yourself. It really is. And I don't know that it's funny because I don't know how much of that plays into the way that the pairings are lined up, because nothing changed later in the week. The pairings were the same pairings. They kept Christian Folin out of the lineup. Everybody else was on the same pairings, and the results were different in different ways. So is that it's one of those things where is that first game just an anomaly of the whole thing, where they're giving up 8 goals like that and it's really poor coverage, or was that what they really are, and tightening up is more of a task and a challenge than what we expect here? It's really difficult to analyze 5 games into the season what you've got, and I find it funny that there are some people who look and go, defensively, this team is a mess. I don't disagree that this team has got areas on the blue line where they could improve, but I also don't think that they're not playing the best 6 that they can throw out there right now with what they have on the active roster. I don't disagree with that. I think after game 2, and Rob, we talked about this a little bit last week when we were breaking down the Colorado game, Christian Folin's got to be your 7. At least I think. So if he's got to be your 7, then the other 6 are going to be in. It's just about utilizing them in the right spots, or maybe not even from a coaching standpoint, utilizing them in the right spots, but as players, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses. I'm watching some guys do things that I don't think are their strengths, or expose themselves in their weaknesses a little bit and things like that. And I don't disagree that, one of the guys who's kind of struggled out of the gate is Ivan Provorov. He hasn't had the best start to his season, and he hasn't been completely mistake-free like he was in so many games last year. It's not going to be perfect, but I think people are expecting a lot more out of the top pairing. I saw a comment on Twitter earlier about how somebody said Shane Gossesbear should be converted to a forward because he doesn't defend well. And I disagree with that. I think he's actually been one of the better defensive players for this team in the first 5 games. It just looks horrible because you can't go in and out of, before the Saturday game against Vegas, when you're a team that's allowed 19 goals on the season and 17 of them have come in the last 3 games, yeah, that's a problem. Defensively, that's a big time problem. But I don't get the sense that Shane Gossesbear doesn't belong on the blue line when, in my opinion, he's been one of the better defensive players that you've had so far.
His defensive play has grown leaps and bounds.
Yeah, no question. And I just think there's a lot left to be desired from a lot of other guys, Provorov included so far. Yeah, he may be your top guy, but I feel like I don't like when people start talking about it like this. And there's a lot of people who have done this, but throwing his name into the Norris Trophy conversation that quickly, I'm not saying that he's not a good defenseman. He's a great defenseman. He's already a stud at number 1. He's playing all the minutes and things like that. But cool, like, you want to pump the brakes here a little bit. He's still only in his 3rd season. Give him a little bit of time and understand that sometimes he might not come out and have the best start to a year or the best week or the best month or whatever. And I think you're seeing that this month so far, at least to start the season, that he's been a little bit more prone to mistakes in the first couple games. I think he's cut down on it a lot since the San Jose game. But there's a lot of factors that come into being top-notch defenseman. I think the top pairing has been fine for what they've had to do, but there's certainly areas that they can improve. I think Ghost has been fine as a defenseman. I think that the Travis Sanheim-Radko Gudas pairing has left a lot to be desired with turnovers and penalties and things like that. And I think that because Sanheim's taken quite a few, I believe, so far. He's taken probably at least 3 or 4 in these first few games. And then the Andrew McDonald, Robert Haig pairing, I think Haig's been pretty solid, all things considered. I think he's playing his physical game. He's actually activating a lot more than he used to as an offensive type of guy. McDonald's just been kind of lousy. I mean, he's turning the puck over more than I can remember, and it feels like they're magnified. And it's not to say that I don't think that Andrew McDonald can bail himself out and make himself better in certain games and do some of the small things that you need to win. It's just that I think his mistakes are even more magnified now than they were before, and it's becoming a problem. So that's the defensive issues that I'm seeing so far. And Look, I think that from the start of the week, if Tuesday, we're talking Tuesday's game first to the end of the week, a lot of stuff was cleaned up defensively, but the results don't change overnight like that, and you can't limit yourself to being one mistake away from winning a game or losing a game. Sometimes that's the way it kind of comes down to it for me.
Well, just to unpack a lot of things you just said there, Kevin. One, you don't win the Norris Trophy in October. So I don't think Ivan Provorov going through a rough stretch in the beginning of the season. October, especially the first couple of weeks, it's really more of like, a glorified preseason. It's good. It's great if you can win a couple of games, but you're still kind of rusty. You haven't been playing with normally who you do play with in the regular season while you're playing in the preseason. So you're still getting acquainted with your teammates, your defensive partner, your line mates. So I'm not really going to panic over Ivan Provorov not playing the way Ivan Provorov should play. I think he can still improve leaps and bounds and actively compete for a Norris Trophy. My biggest concerns, because I actually have been pleased with the way Travis Sanheim and Robert Haig have played. I'm actually fully convinced that if they keep going the way they're going, they're going to be the defensemen the Flyers need them to be sometime in January, February, when they need them to play exceptionally well. I don't like what I'm seeing from Radko Gudas or Andrew McDonald really at all. Look, we were talking about the game in San Jose. Andrew McDonald was woefully out of position for that Joe Pavelski goal. Like, not even in a position where he could do anything on a shot that Joe Pavelski didn't even get a whole lot of. Radko Gudas is just that. We kind of know who Radko Gudas is at this point in his career. He's the guy that's going to, try to front the net, take the body, maybe put himself out of position to take the body. He can guard the blue line well, but he's not going to be able to, be the best with the puck. He's not going to, have the best defensive instincts most of the time. He's going to take stupid penalties, and eventually he's going to get himself suspended. But I just didn't understand, because I wasn't here last week. I didn't understand why he went out for Christian Folin, because you guys were talking about how Folin did not play particularly well and how he was involved with a couple of those goals from the Colorado game. But one of the main staples of Dave Haxtell, of any coach, is when you play play a game well, and especially a game that they played against Vegas. Their two best games have been against Vegas this season so far. Why do you mess with the lineup? Why did you put Folin in when you just, you played that well? Just so you could have Folin in for a game? He's not Travis Sanheim from last year. He's a guy who's played in the NHL before. You don't need to give him the experience right away, especially if you're playing that well.
Well, I agree with that. And it wasn't even like it was a back-to-back situation where you were trying to get a well-rested guy in there. He was just trying to get a look at him. And I don't know if that's a reason to make a change. It's definitely not. To me, it's not.
Might also be something where he's just trying to see, how well he does, playing with other guys in a game situation. But I do agree. I mean, if they're playing so well, why fix what's not broken?
But the other thing that I like, Andrew McDonald's hurt. He's clearly hurt. He came back way too fast. There's even rumblings of that on Twitter, even though most people on Twitter will be like, well, he's always been terrible. But if you have a guy who's kind of still, shaking off an injury, give him the rest. Especially if he's a guy that's he's going to try and eat every puck on the penalty kill or just every defensive zone situation. Give him the rest. Radko Gudas, as far as I know, is perfectly healthy, and he can play the minutes too. Just help out the guy that's kind of hurt, and maybe he's struggling a little bit more than he would usually struggle. In that situation, play Folin instead of McDonald, just so you can give McDonald a game so he's not black and blue by the end of the month.
I'll say this for Andrew McDonald. I've always felt that he gets treated unfairly when it comes to social media because he's the scapegoat. He's the obvious scapegoat. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen already this season put out a tweet about a goal against. somebody scores for Vegas or Colorado or San Jose or Ottawa.
Oh yeah, it's McDonald's fault.
And I get it. I guarantee you, I'll get maybe 1 or 2 tweets that involve AMAC on the ice again, another, or whatever. I'm not shying away from pointing out his mistakes sometimes. If he makes a bad turnover and it leads to a goal, I have no problem sitting there and pinning that on a mistake that he made. That's how this works. If you can clearly identify the problem, we'll go as we progress down the week of the games that we are talking about for this week number 2 of the season, if you will. And we get through the Ottawa game and the second Vegas game. The Flyers lose to Vegas on Saturday, 1-0. 1 goal changes the outcome, right? But it wasn't hard to point out who had the turnover or who didn't completely win the puck battle in front of in the defensive zone that led to Vegas scoring that goal. That's Sean Couturier. And then Couturier didn't recover from that little turnover, sort of. I mean, it was a little bit of a turnover and it was a little bit of a lost battle for a puck because it looks like actually the goal scorer, Cody Eakin, gets his stick on it too and is able to nullify the chance to be able to just get the puck out of the zone. However you want to look at it, Couturier is the focal point there. So you have no choice but to point out that he's the guy who made the mistake in that situation. So it just seems like every time somebody takes a look and sees Andrew McDonald on the ice, it becomes his fault.
And that's not what I was arguing either, because I'm not going to bury Andrew McDonald for, being hurt and not being able to play well. If that is the reason why he's not playing well. He was perfectly fine last season. I had no real qualms with the way Andrew McDonald played last season. He was solid. He rarely turned the puck over. He played pretty well, and he didn't need Provorov or Gostisbehere to quote unquote bail him out. He was playing most of the season with Sanheim or Hag. He played fairly well, and those guys that played right next to him also played fairly well. I'm not burying him for that. I'm just saying in a situation where this guy's hurt, he rushed back. He's in a position where he is a leader on this hockey team, despite the fact that people on Twitter don't like that or just don't like him. You got to be able to protect the guy in some aspect where it's all right, well, we kind of want Foley to go in because we just want to see what he's made of. But we also got this guy who's kind of hurt. Well, let's play him and bench Gudas. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. And I think I'll say this too for that particular pairing for McDonald and Haig right now. Haig's showing more of a willingness to jump into the play, as I said earlier. And I'm wondering if that changes the way that they play also, because it was pretty well established a year ago that McDonald was a little bit of the hybrid kind of guy. He had some offensive prowess, but he was at least able to be that guy that carried the puck if they were trying to move it out with a defenseman, get into the neutral zone, and then eventually look for the pass up that gets you the zone entry or the dump in. In this case, Haig's taking more of a role in that aspect, and I don't know if McDonald's prepared to play the stay-at-home role like Haig was a year ago. Haig kind of focused on that a year ago, and now he's opening up his game a little bit more and getting a little bit more aggressive, and now you're asking, I think you change things because you change how McDonald's able to be, like we said, McDonald didn't necessarily a year ago need an Ivan Provorov or Shane Gostisbehere to bail him out all the time, but I think it was because the role was defined a little bit more. I think in this case, I don't know that Haig's able to bail out Andrew McDonald, especially when he can't really get back into position in time because he may be up on a play and it turns it into an odd man situation or something like that. I think that the way that Haig's played the first 5 games in that little bit of a more aggressive nature when it comes to carrying the puck or getting into the offensive zone has changed the way that we see McDonald playing, because it leaves McDonald with really no security blanket. He's the only guy. You make a mistake, it's magnified. You're left as the only guy back, it's magnified. Even the first goal in Vegas that Jonathan Marchessault scored in the very first game of the season, it's caught in between a line change situation. He thinks he's got the clearance to go off. He doesn't. He's not able to recover. It becomes magnified because he's the focal point sometimes, and it's not always fair, but he has been the focal point of a lot of scoring against in the season so far, and there's no taking that away. And I think you're absolutely right, Dan. I think that he rushed back. I was very surprised as the preseason went along that he thought he was going to get a game in when the injury news came out, as he's trying to recover, that he thought he was going to be able to get a game in. And he didn't look particularly good in that preseason game, and I don't think he's looked particularly good since the season started. I think he needed more time, and he should have sat out those first, maybe he should have sat out every game to this point and been out for the first 5 and been eyeing Tuesday as a possibility, because 6 games in, maybe you're at that point where the injury is a lot more recovered and you're closer to being game ready. I think he did rush himself back, though.
Let's not forget, this is hockey we're talking about here. You got guys rushing themselves back all the time.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's more or less a symptom rather than something worth kind of holding over his head. But that's obviously, we all know the hockey player warrior mentality, and that's just something that he's fallen in line with.
Yeah, I get that. I in the situation where, like, I wasn't on the one of the last podcasts where you guys were talking about, like, going into the season, all that. But there was also that concern with Sean Couturier. He actually kind of rushed back a little bit too. You wouldn't really notice it with Couturier, but with McDonald, like, you kind of need something. You do need that training camp aspect. You still need to be in there and practicing and get a preseason game in just to get, like, your legs underneath you and all that. But in this situation, it was probably better, like what you're saying, Kevin, for him to just take the time that he needed and just come back when he's like 100%. Or at least 90%, because at least then, you can forfeit. You can't forfeit, but you can, take a knee on some of those games in October. Because, like what I said in the beginning of the show, it's kind of a glorified preseason. Like, you want to pick up points, but again, especially at this, with the way the schedule is for the Flyers, you don't really need to win every single game in these first 2 weeks, because they're all against Western Conference teams. Like, they beat the only Eastern Conference team they've played, Ottawa. Great. That's a 4-point game. If Ottawa is actually surprisingly good this year, that'll come in handy. But it's not really going to come in handy for you to beat San Jose or Vegas or Colorado, because you're not competing with them in a playoff spot. This upcoming week, which I'm sure we'll get to, then that's going to be more important. And that's when you're going to want a healthy Andrew McDonald.
Well, I think the other thing about these early games, too, is this is not just the games that we're talking about that the Flyers have played. This is league-wide. There are games where defense has just been flat out optional. So you're getting these, not even just 8-2 games. I'm talking, we've had games that are 8-5 and 7-6 and things like that are around the league. And it's really the result of poor defensive play that's leading to these final scores that look like they belong out of all-star games or something like that. So, and I think that, to your point, Dan, these games against the Western Conference teams, to me, have been not nearly as much about the points as they have been kind of measurements on where you stack up with these teams. It's been great to see them play the defending Western Conference champions hard twice, to be in position to win both games. They did win one of them, and realistically, I don't think that they lose the game against Vegas on Saturday if it goes to overtime. I think that they were in a position where they were getting the better chances, and then if you continue to really open things up, Marc-Andre Fleury was great, but you really open things up, I think you end up beating Fleury somewhere in 3-on-3, because that's how the Flyers' best chances in Saturday's game came in the second period to me, and that's when they were getting breakaways. Play was wide open, and as you make it wide open and you see those opportunities open up and there's a lot more space on the ice and everything like that, I think eventually something would have broken their way. So that's, to me, you at least showed that in 2 games against Vegas, you're capable of playing with Vegas. You're capable. Look at all the little things from that game on Saturday against Vegas. The penalty kill was better, more aggressive. You took away their space getting into the zone. You really played a solid defensive game, hold for 1 turnover at the end. Your goalie was making saves that he needed to. He did leave a few rebounds. You were getting some bounces. Everything falls into place there a little bit. And if you can replicate that kind of effort in every game that you play from here on out, and that's not to say that that's really going to happen, but it's how many times can you replicate that effort? You play like that 90% of the time, you're going to get points in 75% of your games from here to the finish line. And that gets you into the playoffs.
Just going with you with what you're saying about that Vegas game, that was probably the best game they've played all season. They didn't give up very many chances. They did in the third period, which is unfortunate. The only thing that really cost them the game is in the first period. I think it was the first period when Wheel had that empty net chance and he kind of just shot it into Fleury's arm. and then you had a couple breakaways. I believe it was with Giroux and Lawton. You had you had perfect amount of chances to win that game in the first and second period. But there's just the way they tightened things up, because as we'll talk about the Ottawa game, things didn't really, tighten up in that second game of this week. It really did just kind of look like they were just playing the same game they played against San Jose, just against a far inferior opponent. And to me, in this, when they're playing, there is no big reason to kind of worry about this team, because one thing we haven't mentioned so far with this week is that they've obviously, you guys mentioned last week that they don't have JVR, and they won't have JVR until probably midway through November. And they also didn't have Nolan Patrick towards the most of the game against Ottawa, and then all of the game against Vegas. And so they were playing, Dale Weiss, Jordan Wheel, who can't find his way into the lineup and suddenly is the second line center. And they still played a damn fine defensive game as far as I'm concerned.
With the Ottawa game in particular, I thought that the first period was that kind of wide open, not a lot of defensive coverage, very similar to the San Jose game. From that point, really from the early goal by Tkachuk in the second period on, I thought they were much improved and took care of the areas that they needed to improve on defensively at even strength. At that point, anything Ottawa generated was more a result of lack of discipline and poor penalty killing than anything else. That was the good thing about Saturday. They took fewer penalties. They killed off the 3 that they did have to, and the penalty kill was it was almost completely different. They played a completely different style. They were more aggressive. I liked what they did, and this is something that I noticed from watching the game from upstairs, was that they had one player, and usually it would be, I think for the one unit, it was Michael Raffle who played this spot, but he was this front guy who was basically one against the world of whatever was going to come at you to start with. And they lined the other 3 penalty killers behind him like a wall. And I think that was a really good way to do it, because it let one guy kind of step up and be the aggressor in the neutral zone. And then the other ones could just try to kind of block off the blue line so that you could seal off the attacking zone. I think that was a great strategy. I thought it worked really well. Vegas did not generate speed getting into the zone. They kind of had to play the dump and chase game, and they weren't winning those battles anyway, so it was making for much easier opportunity, easier clearing chances, easier. I mean, you're not pinned in your zone at that point. You're able to actually get yourself into a good position if they do get some form of an entry, and maybe it turns into a one-and-done chance or something like that. That's where they improved, but they did not play a good game at all when it came to the penalty kill in that game in Ottawa whatsoever. That was just as pathetic as the San Jose game was. But defensively at 5-on-5 and even strength, I thought that they had gotten much better as that game went on against Ottawa in terms of just being able to take away from what Ottawa was going to be able to do in terms of space. At the same time, good for them that they scored 7 goals that night, because it was one of those games where it could have easily gotten away with how bad the penalty kill was, and yet they went out and they took care of a team that's probably not going to be very good this year. And that's what you're supposed to do. For a change, you kind of thought that the Ottawa game had the potential to be a little bit of a trap game, in the sense that if they come out motivated and played that kind of game against San Jose and play this really well-rounded, going to be good kind of thing, and they open the season at home the way that you would expect a team to open the season at home, then okay. But then you kind of thought that with the back-to-back, there might be the letdown factor in Ottawa. Instead, it was the reverse in a way. They didn't show up for the home opener, and in the game against Ottawa, they did enough to at least turn it into a good enough effort to win a game and get a win where you needed to get one. And against a team, like you said, Dan, this is against a team that it's the only Eastern Conference team you've played so far. Of course, you want to win those games in regulation as much as you can. And the only reason you want to be beating these Western Conference teams for points later on is because as January, February, March hit, every game's going to be important for points, because everybody's going to be fighting for playoff spots, and one game, even against a Western Conference team, could be the deciding factor. But at least they've taken care of that one Eastern Conference game. They looked good against Vegas twice. Let's tell it like it is, too. you're 65 second, you're 85 seconds away from a point against Vegas on Saturday. It was as simple as that. And then from at least 1 point and the possibility of a second point. So the difference between 4 points, 5 points, and 6 points is pretty narrow right now. And if you would have told me that the Flyers would have, I wasn't too surprised by the fact that there was a little bit of a letdown with from game 1 to game 2. It was a tough game in Colorado. That is what it is. You're going to come out on the short end of some of those at times. And then the way that game 3 went to game 4, if you would have told me the Flyers would have come out of that with 3 wins out of the 5, I probably would have said that's not a bad way to start your season. And you wanted, 2 out of 5 when the other one was pretty much everything that you could have possibly done to win a game, and you just didn't find a way to beat a really good goaltender. You kind of have to accept that and remember what got you to that point in that game, and just keep figuring out, the things with the chances there. Like Dan said, the Jordan Wheel opportunity is a spot where you have a chance to you just didn't want to shoot it right back into the goalie, and that's what he did. But even the follow-up chance by Travis Konechny that gets lifted over the net, how often does he miss in that spot? He's been a little bit snake bitten to start the season off too. And you have a few guys who are supposed to be having bigger depth roles in this season that haven't really done a lot. And then you have guys who maybe you didn't expect to that are really performing well so far. So I look at the offense that you've gotten from Robert Haig or the way that Scott Lawton's played in the first 5 games. And I go, it makes me sit there and go, I understand that Nolan Patrick wasn't off to the best start before he left with the injury. And Travis Konechny still doesn't have a goal yet, even though he's had opportunities. You got guys who are making up for it and doing some things that are making it work for you and giving you a chance to win some games here. And it's just a matter of finishing off those chances and getting to the finish line in these games. And as we'll get to wrap, as we start to wrap up the show later, you're going to have 3 of them in the coming week that are going to be very important, even for October games. So we'll, certainly touch on what that means later. But I think so far there's been a lot of things to like about the Flyers season so far, and it's just a matter of finishing those opportunities.
I also I don't really mind the way this, like, if you had told me there'd be 2 and 3 at this situation at this point, 2 weeks in, seeing the schedule the way it is, and then having seen how many injuries they went through just in the preseason, and then losing Patrick and Van Riemsdyk, I think you just go ahead and take it. Just because at this juncture, you've had to switch the lines around too many times just for the first 2 weeks of the season. That messes with chemistry. You've already had to see the top 2 lines get jumbled around. I didn't like where they had James Van Riemsdyk at the beginning. Like he was on the 3rd line in Toronto, and now he's on the 3rd line in Philadelphia. I didn't really like that, especially because he was playing with Simmons, and they're kind of similar in terms of power forward, the power forward type of player. In this situation, though, it's not that bad. Like I keep reiterating on the right now, it's not in a situation where you need to panic. You have injuries, and it's not like that game against Vegas was kind of like in a situation where your team is struggling and they've lost a couple games. They haven't played very well. The Vegas game is kind of that situation where they lose the game, but you're like, all right, things are starting to pick up, because that was a game that the Flyers definitely deserved to win and probably would have won it on like most any other nights when their offense was clicking. So those types of losses are usually the predicator of better things to come. Although they have pretty much a really tough week this week.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. One thing I'll say about that, Dan, is that when I looked at the schedule, Rob and I talked about this last week, and I mentioned that I watched before we even got to the Flyers season opener in Vegas on that Thursday night. I was watching the Boston-Washington game on Wednesday night that opened the season, and I just almost had it was one of those things where I'm like, is this possibly a, setting the tone for what's to come tomorrow night kind of, because, the way I thought about the atmosphere, I thought about the way that Vegas plays, and I thought about the fact that they were also raising a banner. And I'm like, that building's going to be going crazy. The team's going to be motivated, and they're probably going to come out with a lot. And Brian Elliott kind of did the same thing that Marc-Andre Fleury did in Saturday's game in that season opener. You weather the storm. He gives up 1 goal fairly early. the team comes back and gets 2 to get a lead at the end of the first period, and then all of a sudden it opens up big time in the second period. And next thing you know, Elliott's great saves in the first period are the reason why the Flyers are in position to win that game. It's really not that different, and I think that the Flyers kind of, in their own sense, stole one in Vegas with the way that they played through the first period, because there's no doubt that it could have been 3-0 or 4-0 in the first period of that Vegas game too, with the way that Vegas was just flying until the Flyers got that first goal to tie it up. And for the Flyers to get the win there, all right, the loss in Colorado was what it was. And then the San Jose game was going to be tough. And everybody, I think, knew that. I just don't think that they expected it for a home opener. That 2 early goals, both of which were kind of weak in their own way, and then 2 goals later in the first period, were going to virtually end the game before it even started. The Ottawa game is another story. Ottawa, I think, that's why I explained it as a possible trap game for me, because I was like, my thought was, here's a team that the Flyers probably absolutely 1,000% should beat on any given night. And now I'm sitting here thinking, how much does the night before creep into their heads? How much does the fact that Ottawa is not supposed to be that good get in their heads? Because we've seen them come out in years past and play a team that everybody goes into the night going, oh yeah, this should be a chance for them to keep pace with blank in the standings, or maybe you can pass this team and get into the top 3 of the Metro or something like that. And they always come out flat, and they always find a way to be chasing the game, and they always find a way to be on the losing end of that game when the time comes. And instead, they actually handled their business in Ottawa and turned that into 2 points that they needed. And then unfortunately, the way that Saturday's game went, where it was just one of those things of running into a really good goalie in one of his best games to this point in the season, and definitely his best game this season, but in vintage form, taking after what he did a year ago, however you want to look at it, Marc-Andre Fleury played a heck of a game that night, or that afternoon, I should say, and to steal away 2 points for Vegas at a team that was just not off to a really great start in the season at all. So, you look at the opponents and you go, you know what, you'll have to take the 2-3 record to start with and know that you played your best game of the year in a losing effort, 1-0 loss, and it's the most recent thing you've gotten that on most nights you can usually use that kind of effort and win a game, but in that case it just didn't happen that way. But no doubt about it that there are 3 games coming up that are going to mean a whole heck of a lot as you move forward. People talk about it. You can't win the Stanley Cup in October or make the playoffs in October, but you certainly can take yourself out of playoff contention with some of the things that happen in the early games. So that's always something to keep in mind. And the week that's coming up is going to be one of the bigger ones that show where the Flyers are as compared to some of the teams, other teams in the Eastern Conference, especially teams that the teams that I think had were varying differences in terms of the way that their team was perceived at the beginning of the season last year, at the end of the season, and where they kind of are now even. So before we move on and start talking about, I guess, the week that's to come, was there any other final thoughts that you guys had on some of the things from the past in this past week or anything like that?
I am glad that they were able to basically score a touchdown on the Senators, because obviously, like you mentioned earlier, how you just got to put that home opener in the rear view as quick as they can. It's not just going up for a potential trap game. It's getting out of Philly as quick as you can and getting on a plane, going up to another country, going to Canada, going to Ottawa, and having to get ready for another game. So they were able to bounce back pretty quickly. Yeah, it started off a little inauspiciously with Brady Tkachuk scoring midway through the first, but it's one of those things where they were able to bounce back. They were able to get the offense clicking a little bit, and really put that game, that San Jose game, out of their minds. I'm glad that they were able to bounce back. They were able to rebound pretty good from that.
And just going a little forward too, they're going to see Colorado not this week but next week, and then they'll see San Jose the week after that. So there's still the possibility of, you lost those 2 games to Colorado and San Jose, but you can still get the split in not too far that time. Like getting a split with Vegas is perfectly acceptable, because those are 3 really good teams. Those are 3 teams that were in the playoffs in the West last year. One went to the Western Conference. One was in the Western Conference Final. Won the Stanley. went to the Stanley Cup final, didn't win it. Washington did. But those are three teams that are expected to at least do well. So if you can get a split out of those, that's more than acceptable.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think once again, you kind of have one of these schedules to start the year. The Flyers had this happen at times last year too, where they're playing a lot of teams from out of conference early. You're going to finish up your season series with Vegas, Colorado, and San Jose is going to happen not in October, but it's going to happen early November. It's going to be right after that as part of a West Coast trip. So you're going to wrap that up. And then they're going to take care of Arizona quickly too. So you're going to have all of those happen. At one point in time, they're going to play, and we're getting into this, they're going to play 3 Eastern Conference games this week. Then they have 2 more for the rest of the month after that. And then when this West Coast trip starts, their first 6 games, their last game of October and their first 5 in November are against Western Conference teams also. So you factor all of that type of stuff in, they really don't get into the heat of Eastern Conference play until mid-November when regularly you're playing all these teams. And it's not just regularly, it's look at some of the teams that they would have to play for the first time during that stretch as mid-November into early December. They'll see the Rangers for the first time, which is just, it's not a matter of where the Rangers are in the standings as much as it is the Rangers are one of those teams that just can give you fits because they're within your division, and it's not always as easy as you think. They play Tampa for the first time. They play Toronto for the first time. They'll play Pittsburgh for the first time. So all of those teams are going to make their first appearances or be on the schedule for the first time, and that's big tests for them as they move forward. But for right now, let's just actually focus on the 3 games that we're talking about coming up this week. Just like last week, 2 games at home, 1 on the road. The Flyers will start with Tuesday night at home against the Florida Panthers. They will travel to Columbus to play the Blue Jackets on Thursday night, and then it's another Saturday afternoon game against the New Jersey Devils. And let's start with that Florida game, guys, because the Florida game, first of all, the Flyers are just going to be looking for a better result to the effort. Saturday had the effort. They probably deserved a better fate. They didn't get that, though, and they didn't get any points out of it. And that's the part that hurts and is tough to swallow. You get Florida here. It's an opportunity to play an Eastern Conference team. You certainly want to showcase the same effort and get the points this time. And one thing I think is important for Florida is that here's one of these situations where you're going to be playing, by all standards, a backup goalie because Roberto Luongo is going to still be out with injury. So at that point, the Flyers are going to be playing more than likely a backup. And Florida has not won a game yet this season. They're 0-2-1 on the season.
Yeah, they've only played 3 games, which is it's kind of weird.
Well, there's a lot of teams that have had this weird kind of schedule. I've noticed Tampa Bay's had that kind of schedule too, where games are limited. But you look at Florida's games so far, and it's really, you look at the number of goals they've been scoring, how their offense has performed. They played Tampa to open the season. They scored early and didn't really factor much into that at all later on. Now, granted, something to keep in mind here. You consider Tampa Bay's goalie in this situation. Tampa Bay's got Andrei Vasilevsky, who was a Vezina finalist a year ago and probably figures to be again this year. And he had to make 42 saves plus 2 in the shootout. So that really isn't a game where you can look at the final score and go, it's probably a similar fate to the way that the Flyers Vegas game went on Saturday. That's one where you deserved a little bit better. But then you go to their game against Columbus, and again, another game where they put a lot of shots on net. They took 41 shots on goal. They fell behind 2-0, got a late goal in the first, took a lead in the second. It was tied up, and another late goal in the second gave Florida the 4-3 lead. They gave up 2 goals in the third period, one with under 3 minutes to go, and they come away with nothing. It's just how it's been. And then same thing on Saturday, although this time probably a little bit more of a better defensive effort because they only took 26 shots in this game. They get 2 goals in the second period. It's tied after 2, and again, a goal in the third ends up being the sinking point for them. And one thing I've noticed about all of these games so far is that I don't believe to this point Florida has scored on a power play yet. I believe that they are, I'm actually looking it up now, they are 0-4 They're 0 for 7 in their last 2 games, and I believe they were 0 for 3, so I think they're 0 for 10 to start the year. And that's either a great thing for the Flyers or a terrible thing, because it either means that Florida is really not as good as a power play team as people want to think, or it means that they are just waiting to break out of the slump, and the Flyers sometimes are the best medicine for that. So take your pick on that one, but Florida's had their struggles so far this year, and very much like the game against Vegas, here's a team coming in that's winless. Vegas had a win in 1 out of the first 5 games on their season before Saturday. So you've got a team in a vulnerable spot thinking about the results probably and thinking about what do they have to do to win a game. They've lost their last 2 by virtue of third period goals in regulation, so they're trying to figure out probably what to do to get better on that stance. It's a lot of things like that, and to that point, this either looks like an opportunity to take advantage of a team that's struggled out of the gate so far and doesn't have, has 1 point in the standings through 3 games, or it's a team that's waiting to break out and you're going to need a whole lot of your best and then some to hold them at bay. What do you guys think?
Let's not forget about the Florida Panthers this season, because obviously 3 games isn't exactly the biggest sample size to go off of for them. But this is a very, no pun intended, hungry Panthers team coming into this season. I don't want to say it's a kind of measuring stick game for the Flyers, but you look at the Panthers. They had a tremendous second half of the season last year. They finished just 1 point shy of the playoffs, and with attack they got guys like Alexander Barkov, Jonathan Huberdeau, newly acquired Mike Hoffman, Vincent Trocheck, and what have you. These are guys that are ready for some serious business this season. It's not exactly going to be an easy game for the Flyers, who obviously they were a playoff team last year. So it's one of those things where you look at how decent the Panthers were last year. They want to build off of that, and they want to actually get over that 1 point hump. They want to get back into the playoffs. And yeah, it is still October, but it's one of those things where it's not exactly a matchup that you can overlook.
This definitely strikes me as one of those games that the Flyers wanted to continue playing good defensively. This might be a problem because the last time they faced the Panthers, they did not play particularly well defensively, and they got their lunch eaten by the likes of Dadonov, Trocheck, Barkov, Huberdeau. This looks like this could be a potential barn burner and not something that Dave Haxtell wants to see on from his side, because he wants this team to be a little bit more structured defensively and keep the puck out of the back of the net. So this one could get ahead of the Flyers. The Panthers are those type of the Flyers tend to give up the first goal too, and once they start chasing the game, then they start taking penalties and all that. This one could get away from them. So a big key here would stay structured, stay playing the way they played against Vegas. Don't get into the lapses they had in that third period against Vegas, because there's going to be a lot of matchups here that they're going to. A Sanheim's going to have to see a Trocheck, or a Hag's going to have to see Barkov. It's going to happen eventually. So you're going to have to, just everybody's got to be all in on this one, because it could be one of those, we've said earlier in the podcast that there's been a lot of scoring. This could be one of those 6-4, 6-5 type of games.
Yeah, it could. And, I think that one of the things that really hits it on the head here is, we're 5 games into the season now, and the Flyers haven't scored the first goal in any of them yet. Now, obviously, it's easy to say that one after the Vegas game most recently, where the first goal turns out to be the only goal and that wins it. But how often, it's one of those things where I look at these games so far, and I don't think that there's a single game to this point of the season where the Flyers, the Flyers came out of the first period in Vegas with a lead. And that was only by virtue of a goal with maybe about a minute and a half left in the period, if not less than that. And outside of that, I don't think that there's a single game that the Flyers have led through 20 minutes where they kind of were able to go into the second period and not worry about what they had to do to get back ahead in the game and play with the lead. The Vegas game is really the only game that I can remember where the Flyers have played with a lead for a significant portion of the second and third. The Flyers were kind of in a back and forth game with Ottawa in the second period and only took the lead for good toward the end. Then they opened it up in the third a little bit. But otherwise, they haven't really been playing in front much. You fall behind early in Colorado. You fall behind early against San Jose. It's tough to keep digging out of that hole, and Florida's got enough offensive power, even if they haven't shown it that much yet. You only score 1 goal in Tampa. They scored 5 against Columbus or 4 against Columbus, I should say. I'm sorry, in a game that they ended up losing late. And then, so you're scoring okay so far if you're Florida, but for 3 games, but you're also not scoring enough in these situations based on the teams you're playing. It wasn't 1 goal wasn't going to beat Tampa Bay. 4 didn't end up being good enough to beat Columbus, and then 2 wasn't going to beat Vancouver, who's gotten, Vancouver's gotten good production so far with Elias Pettersson in the lineup and as a rookie, and Bo Horvat's been off to a good start too. So when you look at those kind of guys getting points and things like that, but it's Trocheck only has 1 goal so far this season. Huberdeau only has 1 goal so far this season. Barkov has 1 to this point this season. It's guys who you would expect to really be lighting it up, and they haven't been doing it yet as they were a year ago. So you want to see where this can go for them, and they're probably looking to break out in one of these games sooner or later. And a team like the Flyers that can be prone to turnovers and mistakes and lapses in defensive coverage could really be prime for Florida in this case. The Flyers will also this week have Columbus and New Jersey on the schedule, and I think this is completely different territory than the other 2 Eastern Conference games we talked about. The win already in Ottawa in the game against Florida, because now you're talking about divisional games, and I don't really know what to make of either team so far this year. Columbus has kind of either completely had it or completely not had it. One or the other. They're going to be relatively fresh off of at least going into whatever their next game is. Actually, no, Columbus doesn't play until Thursday against Philly. So you consider that right now they have, if you include Sunday and then the 3 days to follow in between games, they're going to have 4 days to sit on an 8-2 loss to Tampa Bay. So, which I don't think in the slightest bit shows what they're capable of. They've won games. They've won 3 games this year. They had the late win in Florida. They won at home against Colorado. They beat a Detroit team that's probably not figuring to be very good either. And I look at those things and the number of goals that they've scored in most of these games. It's funny, if they've lost a game, they've lost because they really haven't been able to score. And if they've been able to go out and put up a few goals, anywhere around 3 or 4, they're winning a game. So it's funny that way. I don't think you can overlook some of the guys that Columbus has by any stretch. You're talking Artemi Panarin for 1, Cam Atkinson is another, Nick Foligno's been good, guys like that. And then Jersey has been off to just this really strong start when a lot of people weren't sure what to think of them from one year to the next. New Jersey's been a team that has come out and delivered in 3 straight games to open the season. They really, you look at the game that they played against Edmonton to open the season, and that was a game that was obviously a little bit of special circumstances there. But the way that they started out, Kyle Palmieri's had 2 goals in every single game he's played so far. And let's put it this way. Here's the thing about Palmieri to me. Palmieri's already a Flyer killer as it is. Now give him, he's come out and he scored 6 goals in 3 games. And the team itself has only scored 14 total. Now, interestingly enough, New Jersey's got 2 things that I find interesting about this leading up to this game against the Flyers the following Saturday, the 3rd and final game this week for the Flyers. For one, New Jersey's going to play 2 more games before that, so they will have a busier schedule coming in. The second part of it is that aside from making that trip and playing a game as part of the series that they have in Europe and things like that, they're going to play. They'll have played 4 straight home games, and the game against the Flyers is their first road game of the season. So I find that a little bit interesting that the New Jersey Devils have kind of enjoyed home ice a lot. They were able to win a convincing game against Washington. They handled business against San Jose on Sunday, and they're going to play Dallas and Colorado. And again, it's one of those things where it's a lot of Western Conference teams to start it, and then the Flyers are going to be one of the first Eastern Conference teams. And that should be an interesting one too. So, guys, your thoughts on the rest of the week's schedule, Columbus and New Jersey, and what these first Metro games are going to mean to this team.
Well, for the Columbus game, they're going to be without Brandon Dubinsky and Seth Jones, which are two actually pretty important pieces to that team, to help keep teams from scoring. So that could still be potentially a high-scoring affair, depending on who they start, because it looks like Korpisalo and Bobrovsky have been, getting a decent amount of time together. But obviously, there's some problems with Bobrovsky, and there's a concern that he might not stick around with the team, much like Panarin after this season. So maybe they're looking to get Korpisalo in there a few more times to see if he can take over the reins. But the Flyers have a lot of problems when they go to Columbus. They don't really go in there, and it's been kind of a house of horrors for them. So it is important for them to go in there and kind of exercise those demons against a team that, they haven't had too much success with over the last few years. John Tortorella coached teams have kind of, handled the Flyers over the time of his entire coaching career, practically. So they're going to have to, find a way to, beat Bobrovsky or Korpisalo and beat the way that those, that lunch pail, workman-like kind of game that, the Columbus Blue Jackets play. And Artemi Panarin is just, he's got 7 points in 5 games. So it's going to be a hard time if they can't contain, if they can't contain the top players so far, they're going to have a hard time containing Panarin as well. And for New Jersey, they're just playing the way New Jersey always plays. They keep you off the board, and surprisingly, this team like last year, they can score. And the Flyers have had trouble with New Jersey too. So it'll be interesting if they can find a way to actually beat two teams that over the past few seasons, they have not had the ability to get consistent points against.
I am glad to get the divisional play back into the mix. It's definitely going to be an interesting one. We'll see how it goes against Columbus, and then if New Jersey's able to keep up that hot start against them, that's something where it looked like it's one of those things that could have been a down year, but the Devils are quickly working to dispel that. So we'll definitely see how these games go. It's the Flyers obviously, as we mentioned earlier, 2-3 isn't the or 2-3-0 isn't exactly the worst start for them, and we don't want to see that get into a further hole, but we'll see how it goes for them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think 2-3-0 is okay given the circumstances. I say that because I don't have any problem with the way that the result was in Saturday's game when you play really well. I have a big problem with the way that the result was in the home opener with the way that you played. But those are things that I think that over the course of the week have been corrected a little bit. This is a big week for the Flyers, though, to me, in terms of just coming out ahead on some of these games. You want to win a few of I think they need to win 2 out of 3 of these games to kind of stamp themselves as a team that is going to actually get off to a better start here. Because first of all, I think you need to do it for the fan base. I think you need to do it for the fan base because the fan base is watching the way that some of these games are going, and they're either watching complete embarrassment like Tuesday was in the home opener, or they're watching Saturday and going, here's that late goal that sinks them again. Same old Flyers, Tell people or do something that shows people that it's not, the same old team here. I think they've come out with a sense of urgency in October. In a sense, obviously Tuesday's game was a wash, and Wednesday's was very wide open. But I thought that they opened the season strong again, and they've actually come out. Maybe not even a sense of urgency as much as it is. They've come out with a sense of they don't have all the time in the world in an 82-game season to fix the problems. It's about what you do from one night to the next, and if there's a mistake that's made, there's a mistake that's made. But the way that they played on Saturday to me was look at how much was corrected in one game to the next. It was we played 2 games. One was really poor, one was a win, but it wasn't the best performance. And here's a game that everything should have gone the right way, and it didn't, but all the right things were there. It's better to see that kind of progression to me. So this is a week where if they can turn that kind of play into 4 points in the standings, maybe even 5, that's great. And that's where they need to be. I think they need to try to really show it in these games against divisional teams. Because, look, early on, it's hard to deny that it's not the same old in a sense, because you look at the division and you go, Carolina has started their season with 4 wins in 6 games to this point. They actually just recently lost to Winnipeg on Sunday to drop that was actually their first loss in regulation all season. So you look at those. You look at the way that New Jersey has started off with 3 wins in 3 games. You look at the way that Columbus has started off. Even teams, it's funny, even a team like Pittsburgh, who has played 4 games to this point, won 2 of them, and both losses have come to Montreal. Montreal then is becoming a little bit of a surprise team early on. That doesn't mean that these results hold out, but let's be real too. Some people don't look at performance on the ice and go, hey, the game against Vegas was good, they just didn't win the game. It's the same old situation because they didn't get any points. And at the end of the day, people are going to refresh the standings, even though October's too early to check standings. But they'll look and they'll go, the Flyers are only above 3 teams in the Eastern Conference in standings, and it's Florida, Detroit, and the Rangers right now. So they're behind a team like Ottawa, who isn't expected to be there. They're tied with a team like the Islanders, who isn't expected to be there. They're behind Montreal, who isn't expected to be there. And I guess it just gets people thinking that maybe they aren't going to figure this out or whatever, and it's really early to be playing that game. But what you do in October can dictate what you're playing for in February, March, and April. And the Flyers have spent some of the last years where they've made the playoffs or just barely missed the playoffs chasing the final standings because you're trying to make up the points that you lost in October and November. So that's where these next 3 games lie for me, is you just don't want to fall into a trap where you're on a bit of a losing streak. You need to bounce back early. I would think that you'd want to do that on Tuesday against Florida first and foremost. And then you want to see if you can play a really good road game before you come home and play New Jersey and see what you can do with that as well. So that to me is where this next week lies for the Flyers, and we'll certainly see where it all goes from there.
It'll also be important because these are very much 4-point games, especially the Devils and Blue Jackets, who, if you're going to go after a top 3 spot in the Metro, Patrick, you're going to have to, you're going to compete with the Blue Jackets. You're going to compete with the Devils. Capitals, Penguins will also be in there. So these are very important for that specific situation because it's not only the points that you get, it's also the points you take away from the other team.
Exactly. And that's where I mentioned that's that gap that you're chasing at the end of the year possibly, is you lose these games that have really 4-point implications on them now. You're regretting them when it comes to March and you start playing games where you go, every game's a must win. There were times last season whereas it got down to the wire a little bit and you were watching these games. I mean, actually, I think a fair example of one is the game against the last time the Flyers played the Florida Panthers. That was a road game, and yes, it was a game where the Flyers looked very ill-prepared and everything about that, but you can't afford to fall into losing streaks in March, and the Flyers had gone from being in first place in the division for a day to a 5-game losing streak with only 1 point earned in the standings that can knock you to the brink of being out of playoff contention. So the Flyers have to kind of bear that in mind, because I find it interesting that they had one of these games again so early in the year. I mean, you look at last year and they played a game where they won convincingly in an 8-2 fashion like that. They also played a game where they were humiliated. Not humiliated maybe by the final score, but they lost a game in kind of humiliating and frustrating fashion. That was the game in Nashville last season. They also played a game where they did lose 1-0 in the first month of the season too. I found all of that very ironic that they had all of these things happen. So I think it's fair to be concerned about where October is going, but at the same time, let this team come back out on Tuesday and see what you get on Tuesday. See if that turns into a win. And let's see where they are in another week, because if they come out and they win 2 or 3 of these games and suddenly are at 8 or 9 or 10 points in the standings, it's going to probably present a completely different outlook than it did as we're talking about it now. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Flyerdelphia Podcast. We want to thank everyone for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the Flyerdelphia Podcast. We are on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like I said on the previous weeks, lots of other content included, not just our reposting of the podcast. Video previews, video recap was posted from the Flyers Vegas game on Saturday as well, so there's that. And obviously we're going to have more of those to come as well. There will be a preview of Tuesday's game against Florida to come. Also, remember that you can check us out on SoundCloud as part of the Sports Talk Philly podcast network. You can listen to us and shows on the rest of the Philly sports scene through the podcast network. There is the Phillies Nation podcast on Sports Talk Philly, which covers the Phillies, the Pick Swap pod covering the Sixers, and the Kelly Green Boys covering the Eagles as well for football. So next week we will be back. 3 more games again to look at, as we just told you about. Tuesday, at home against Florida. Thursday on the road against Columbus. Saturday at home against New Jersey. And we'll be pumping this one out to you quickly because the Flyers will have a game on the following Monday night that we're going to want to get you prepared for as well, in addition to 2 others that are going to be to come as well. So going to be an exciting week in Flyers hockey, hopefully. 3 more games to watch, which is always great when the week is loaded with a few games. And once again, thank you for tuning in. For Rob Riches and Dan Heaning, I'm Kevin Durso, and this has been the Flyerdelphia Podcast on SportsTalkPhilly.com. This has been the Flyerdelphia Podcast, part of SportsTalkPhilly.com, with Kevin Durso, Rob Riches, and Dan Heaning.